Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for that fascinating talk, Charles. Very pleased to be joined here on the stage by Her Excellency Sheikha Mayasser, the chairperson of the Qatar Museums and one of the great creative patrons in the world of the arts today. Also by Francesco Banderin, the Assistant Director General of Culture at UNESCO. And Charles really needs no introduction any longer. He's really Mr. City. Your Excellency, if I might begin with you. As Charles indicated in that talk, everywhere in the world today, there's a tension between the local and the global, between tradition and innovation, between what Charles called creativity and heritage. Well, you've really shaken things up here in Doha. The remarkable Damien Hirst fetus sculptures, the Tribeca Movie Festival, the museums by Jean Nouvel and IMP. Why have you done that? And how fearful have you been in this very traditional society here in Qatar of a backlash?
Hello. Good morning, everybody. I thank you for being here. But I think you discussed a very interesting project with Jean Nouvel, who I know will be speaking later today. The National Museum, for example, is an example where contemporary architecture embraces heritage. And we preserved the old palace to be at the heart of the museum, but at the same time brought creativity and innovation to the new building, which will host the collection of the old National Museum, but also new acquisitions from local communities. We've got a lot of donations from Qatari families and so forth. I think as a nation that's growing very quickly and embracing global culture and joining in the narrative of global art, I think it's quite obvious for us to bring in contemporary artists. It doesn't mean that we're trying to create controversial moments as you have expressed. I think that's the trending media comment, but that's completely opposite to what we're trying to do. In fact, we're trying to bring contemporary artists here to inspire young artists to see what's happening around the world and to be inspired, because not everybody can travel around the world, but we can organize exhibitions from the world. And that's what we've tried to do and will continue to do so with complete respect to our tradition and conservative culture.
And Your Excellency, what is your vision of this city 10 years from now? How do you see it evolving going forward?
I'll go with Charles' comment that you can never answer these questions. I think our city is growing so quickly, it's very difficult to tell because there's too many stakeholders, and I think the vision is one in terms of develop but preserve our heritage and our culture. So we're all looking forward to hosting the World Cup in 2022, and that has already brought a lot of innovative and interesting architects, but at the same time it has caused controversy. There's the Zaha Hadid building, which everybody didn't like, but we liked it. So we went ahead and we're starting to construct the Wakra Stadium. So I think art is a matter of taste, just like fashion and anything else, food. It's going to be, I think, very interesting for us in 10 years' time to see the results of our innovative efforts today.
Do you worry about the disruption? Do you worry about the controversy? Do you worry in such a traditional place that this could cause tensions?
I think the decision-making process is a very collaborative one. If we take the example of the stadiums for 2022, it's a group of people, individuals who are working on these stadium designs and so forth and proposing it to government entities to make final decisions. So I think all the decision-making is very democratic and very collaborative. So I don't think there is any worry in that area. Instead, we're very much excited, and the more the press attacks Qatar for hosting the World Cup, the more excited we are to host an amazing World Cup.
Francesco, the world is moving into cities at a remarkable pace. For the first time in human history, more than half of humanity lives in cities. Within the next 10, 20 years, that will rise to 60%. As you watch this process from your vantage point at UNESCO, how much do you worry about whether this process is sustainable, that cities are capable of sustainable development? And how do you think that as this process goes on, what is the best course for nurturing creativity in cities and avoiding what Charles pointed to, the kind of homogenization that can leave somebody getting out of a plane here in Doha or in some other city or Singapore as he or she walks into a mall feeling, well, where am I exactly? I've just traveled 10,000 miles, but it looks pretty much the same as the place I just left. How do you make cities vibrant, creative, without having them be homogenized? And how do you make, when so much humanity is in cities, how is that sustainable?
Well, it's a big question, and we're witnessing in these years a process that probably is unique in human history, is the massive urbanization. I mean, if you look at the numbers today, are quite staggering. We are, moving hundreds of millions of people to the cities. Now, whether this is bad or good, depends on how this is managed, and we don't have yet many answers. This is why this year, very special year, we have a very important gathering, a meeting, the international community, is the Habitat 3 conference. Will take place at the end of the year in Quito, Ecuador. And this is a 20 years conference that the United Nations organize. So I think it's better that we capture this one because the next is 2036, right? So, well, and this time, I think for the first time, the conference will look at how cities have gained back their role. Cities are back as, center of political power, center of production, innovation, and so on. Maybe in the 20th century, they were a bit obliterated by the nation state, that power. But now the cities are back like they used to be in the other era of humanity in the Middle Ages or in the ancient Greek times. They are now the new centers. And they are the ones that decide the future of humanity and the future of the planet. Juan Clos, which is the director of Habitat, says the sustainability and the future of the environment in the world will be decided in cities. Definitely. That's where sustainability will be decided. So I think it's very important to look at that phenomenon, which has, I think, also very positive aspects. Millions, if not hundreds of millions of people were taken out of poverty because they went to the city. So the city is an important machinery for for human economic development. At the same time, we see what happens when megalopolis such as the one that are developing all the regions of the world are growing up. So there are checks and balances to look at. Culture is certainly at the center of it. You just mentioned not just for identity reasons, but also because it becomes a new way of production. Cities were the center of production in the past, and modern industry went off. In the 19th, 20th century, the modern industry went off the city. Now it's back. Production is back to the city in different forms: the digital form, the art form, the performing, and so on. So we have a chance of having not only a machinery that takes the world out of poverty, but also a machinery that creates the most innovative and forward-looking industry. Where this is going is something that we have to explore.
Thank you. Charles, you've used a variety of adjectives in your various works to describe cities: ambitious city, creative city, digital city, soft city. There's Richard Florida's talk of the creative class in cities. Which of these words is most important these days? I mean, is it that a city's connectivity, its degree of digitization, if you like, should be at the highest possible level? Is the soft city more important, the environment in which we move around, live and breathe? Is it the ambition of the city? What is it? What makes a city successful and fertile ground for the arts and for culture?
Thank you for that complex question. I still, when I thought about the creative city notion at the end of the 80s, of course that word wasn't really used very much, and it's become very overused, and the danger, of course, is it empties out and becomes meaningless. But for me, nevertheless, the source of what that represents to be creative is essentially about human ingenuity and the capacity of creating places where people can be and become the best they could be, organizations too, and so on. So I still believe that that lies at its core. Perhaps I've slightly changed my mind and believe that we need to encourage curiosity first, because you need to first be curious. If you're curious, you're imaginative. If you're imaginative, you may have creative ideas, then become inventive, and then generate innovations. So I still think that that word is very important. The other words, really, my whole aim in life, I suppose, has been to change the intellectual architecture of how we think about cities. And so that's why I constantly emphasize the word soft, because the soft is the hard. The soft in city making is the hard, not the hard. The hard is easy, the soft is hard. Because it's the soft and the hard together that actually animates places. So I wouldn't want to say one word is the primary word. They all hang together. Now, the reason...
What's your next word going to be?
No, there's not going to be any next word.
That's it?
I just think ambition is important because that's a bit like the engine which drives things. Many people talk about vision and all of that. I don't particularly use that word because first you need to have this sort of some internal, let's call it energy, that in a sense leads you to move forward in that way. Clearly, words you've just used like connectivity are key. And if you can ask me a question later about my views about the digital city, but in one sentence, I believe we're going through a tectonic shift, which is dramatic as the Industrial Revolution was in its impacts and scope and power. That's what I believe.
In one of your works, I don't remember which, I was reading, you talked about the extraordinary emergence of Dubai and Doha as new urban centers, city-states, and then you had a phrase, something like, whether they're livable is another matter. And I guess walking around Doha, there's this fantastic skyline, but it's a somewhat fractured experience still, and where you sit, where the kind of boulevard experience in Paris or in a European city, or where you hang out, it's not altogether clear yet whether it's going to emerge in the urban environment. And of course there are questions of climate and others that make that a particular dilemma here. I mean, how important is that urban feel? And if you were looking at Doha today and wanted to create more of that, what would you suggest? And indeed, do you think it's important? Does it matter?
Well, I've always wondered, because I think, obviously there's creativity and imagination in this region. How does one, with the weather, which is very hot and so on, create an environment where you can still generate that street life, which isn't always completely internalized? And clearly there are different perceptions and conceptions of what public and private space is through different cultures and regions in the world. But personally, I feel that showing itself externally is incredibly important, because that's obviously the notion of the city as a stage and a canvas, if you like. And so I would have thought that one of the next challenges for the city makers, planners in Doha, as an example, is to sort of work out how can we make these buildings, which look rather isolated, they hang together through roads, how can they feel more seamless? And clearly there are lots of innovations about cooling and all of that, where you could actually create some of the boulevard feeling you're talking about. I'm not saying Paris is the only place that has that, but that to me, in terms of the lived experience of cities, is incredibly important.
Your Excellency, what do you think of that?
I think that we've already experimented with cooling mechanism, not just for the World Cup stadiums, but also if we look at Qatar, the cultural village, they've created cooling stations within the boulevard where you can sit in August where it's more than 40 degrees outside, but it feels like it's 20 degrees because it's innovative ways of cooling the areas where you're seated and not have to face the reality of our weather. That's something we can't change, unfortunately. But I know that our urban planners are working in order to create a more cohesive city plan. As Charles was saying, the city's been developing so quickly, and then there's a private sector and public sector, semi-private developments, and now it's a question of how everything will flow together. And I think we do have a plan in place. Perhaps it's not so obvious with so many cranes up in the air, but I think in 10 years' time, going back to your previous questions, it will be better experienced.
How did your experience of the United States, Your Excellency, having been educated there, worked at the Tribeca Movie Festival in New York, how did that experience of the US affect your vision for Doha?
Well, at first I ended up in North Carolina, which is very different to New York, and it was a very good experience because it was so isolated. To go anywhere, it was impossible.
Why did you choose Duke University?
I think it
If I
was
may
just the
ask.
ranking of the duration. It was a very good school, and we were actually very familiar with families in North Carolina because UNC Chapel Hill were in discussion at that time with the Education City to set up their business school. So it was an obvious choice for me to go there. And it was quite interesting. They had East Campus, West Campus, so everything was so easy and almost isolated from reality because you can go from one place to another. But experiencing the city was a different experience. You couldn't easily access it, whereas New York, when I went to Columbia, you could walk to Columbia from anywhere. You know, everything was so easy. The grid system in New York made everything so accessible. So comparing it to Doha, it's a very different city. I mean, there are new developments like Lusail, where I think it's more pedestrian friendly and you can walk. There's also the Pearl, where it's a complete urban plan where you have the school, you have the apartments, you have the shopping malls, the cinemas. You know, you don't need to leave the Pearl in order to survive. You could spend a week, 2 weeks until your electricity gets cut out and then have to check into some hotel. But that's manageable. That's what happens when a city develops very quickly. We learn from the mistakes and ensure that it doesn't happen in our new projects.
Your Excellency, at the same time as the emergence of Dubai, Doha, as these great new commercial and artistic centers, we've seen dark forces at work in the Arab and Islamic world, and cities like, or places like Palmyra, Aleppo, Bamiyan, have become synonymous with destructiveness and darkness and pillaging. And these are really two sides of the Arab world, if you like. How do you reconcile that in your head, and how do you explain these destructive forces that have taken great cultural sites and in some instances reduced them to ruins?
I think this is something Francesco here and I have discussed many times in the past with the UNESCO and the World Heritage activities where we've supported and participated. And I think the situation is very sad to see historical buildings that belong to the world being destroyed. But I think the bottom line is it's economic factors that are leading people to act in these ways. So, I mean, I hope that one can preserve what's left. And
You think it's more economy than ideology?
I believe it is. I mean, if you don't have anything to survive on, nothing really matters. I mean,
so if living conditions improve, these barbaric movements like ISIL should be eliminated, you think, or will in time be eliminated or disappear?
I think anywhere in the world, if there's economic stability, there's no reason for political movements that go against progress.
Francesco,
I don't know if Francesco has anything
what
else
do you
to
think,
add on
and
this
more
matter.
generally on this issue of cultural vandalism, which takes place in even a city like Roma or Napoli. What do you think of, what is driving these destructive forces? How do you protect the world's cultural heritage from them? And how do you address this whole issue of cultural vandalism driven in part by the global capitalist system.
I don't need
Of course, what we see today is pretty unseen before. The front that we have, in front of us is very, very vast. We have distractions everywhere, and very, very serious. So I think that this has motivated the international community.
Your mic, I think.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The UN and so on to raise the attention. Now, the Security Council deals with this issue. They issue resolutions and so on. So we have a much bigger awareness, and I think this is a positive response. Clearly, it's not easy to stop these things, especially on the ground when there is a conflict ongoing. But we are getting better. We're getting better in terms of managing information on what's happening, helping those on the ground. We're doing a lot of that, and of course preparing for reconstruction and so on. But the lesson has to be learned. There must be much more attention in prevention of these disasters. Sites have to be prepared for this kind of conflict impacts, museums and so on. We have really have to move much more of the, say, political and cultural resources of the world in to protect these areas, because in fact no site is safe. Sometimes we have distractions that are not linked to conflict but to disasters. Imagine what happened in Haiti or Nepal and so on, and we cannot be caught by surprise every time. So there is a very big movement to improve the capacity of the system. By the way, Qatar is helping a lot financially and politically to help us developing the system that make damages less impacting. But certainly it is become a very, very big issue, maybe within the largest, the broadest humanitarian response. But certainly the heritage now is at the top of the agenda of the international community.
Do you understand the mindset of somebody who destroys Palmyra?
Well, I think in that case it was, in my view, a political message. Some kind of, they wanted to destroy something that we care and the world
What's
cares
the
about.
political message?
Well, we want to destroy what you care. It's an antagonism to the rest of the world. There is a little bit of iconoclasty also, which is something, but not when you destroy a building. When you destroy a statue, perhaps there is, but when you destroy a building, it's more, I think, a political message to the world. We take away what things that you care about because they've been clearly protected and by a coalition of forces along the past century. And the message is, we're against.
Charles, creative, culturally rich cities, places, dynamic, innovative places come in many shapes and forms. If you consider London on the one hand, and it's amazing to me that the mayor of a city like London, where you can't walk in the street without hearing a foreign language, wants to take Britain out of the European Union, reduce connectivity of Britain with the rest of Europe. But that's an aside. I hope you'll forgive me, but I'm really not pleased by that. But Charles, they come in many shapes and forms. You look at London, you look at Palo Alto, you look at, Chicago, Doha. Do they have something in common or not?
I think there are two responses to that. Firstly, I think we need to look at what creativity means in different cultural and civilizational contexts, because clearly what is creative perhaps within a European tradition may be different than one within the Arab world or the Chinese or Japanese traditions. So I think one has to put that have that in mind. I think one feature that is common actually to the creative impulse is one simple word, which is really, I think, openness. Openness in being more open than closed is, I think, the key word that straddles across everything that I do believe is intercultural, that I do believe is true through time. So
openness.
Yeah.
So Pyongyang is not going to be a great cultural center.
Possibly not.
Okay.
No, I mean, in that sense, yes, I completely agree with you. Now, when I say openness, I don't mean open 24/7 and stuff like that. And also, by the way, when I say creative, I don't mean let's throw everything up and just chuck it out of the window. What I mean is the willingness to stand back, to reassess, to see if things are all right, and then perhaps to leave them as they are, having reassessed them, but you were open in asking the question in the first place. So I think the key word is the one I've already mentioned, which is to be more open than closed.
Your Excellency, your Minister Al-Khawauri, in his new book, which I was looking at, The Global Majlis, interesting book, he writes about how monotheistic faiths grew up often in the vicinity of the desert. And he says that's not surprising because, quote, deserts are often synonymous with silence, solitude, and mindfulness. Silence, solitude, and mindfulness. I was wondering if you might be able to tell us how the desert for you has been an inspiration, if it has, in your conception of what this place should be.
Well, you know, the desert for all of us living in Qatar, whether we're Qataris or guests to Qatar, is very much part of our identity. You know, it's somewhere you go to when the weather permits, and usually there's a season where people camp. And as a young girl, we used to go, my family would go and stay there for months. We'd even commute from the desert to school. So it was very much part of our identity. And if you've not been, I encourage you to go, because these are areas where the government has preserved and kept them. You know, there will be no skyscrapers there. It's very much preserved. And given that we've had a lot of rain last week, it's pretty green. So you'll be surprised to see a green desert. But it's very much part of our identity. And when we invited Richard Serra to commission him on a sculpture, we said to him, we would like you to do something in the desert where we preserve it, but at the same time we create a public space for people to experience art in a very remote and unexpected place, something they would experience only here and not something you would experience in New York or London or elsewhere. So he chose a very remote area. In fact, so many times I've had visitors come to Qatar to visit the sculpture, and they'd get lost even if I've sent them with my driver. Hours on end, they can't find the place.
How can you get lost in the desert?
Well, there's the basic indications of sight signs or so forth doesn't exist, so you really need to know your way around to get there. But in any case, if you've not been to the Richard Serra East-West, I do recommend that you do. And though there is an art installation in a very remote place where it's quiet and people go there to meditate or just to enjoy nature, it's pretty much a urban planned structure by Serra where he wanted to connect the sea to the desert. And I think he did a very good job in installing the work, but at the same time not destroying the landscape.
Are you planning anything else in the desert before the World Cup?
I can't say yes to that or no, because we don't know. Actually, we invite a few artists and they're still proposing ideas. I wouldn't be surprised if there was another work in the desert, but I can't say for sure.
Francesco, when you look at your own wonderful country, Italy, so rich in culture and cities like Rome or Florence or Milan.
My city, Venice.
Venice.
Thinking.
How do you feel about how Italy has managed, going back again to Charles, to combine and marry creativity and heritage? Sometimes some visitors to Italy, and it's part of its charm, feel the country has not exactly embraced modernity, shall we say. How do you see that balance in your own country and in your own city?
But you see, the two things go together. I think this is one of the messages that Charles tries to pass on. In fact, heritage and creativity are very much linked. They are linked historically, and they could be linked today in ways maybe that are very different. I think we also have to revise a little bit our concept of heritage. That's a very important point, because heritage is a very dense concept and we have to unpack it a little bit and see.
Could you do that?
Yeah, I think it's possible. But heritage contains memory, contains beauty, contains sense of place, contains history, so many, many concepts. I think in the future, especially if we have to deal with the needs of the new countries, the new cities, we will have to unpack that and try to use these pieces, you know, to create new forms of heritage. I think this is happening anyway, you know, but we have to make it more rational. Or in Italy, all this density is there, but I think we can learn from that experience in order to, you know, see how the others can find their way.
Charles, back to connectivity a minute. Venice obviously grew and prospered as a trading city on the sea. In the 19th century, you saw cities like Birmingham in Britain growing on the basis of canals. Today, the airport, which in terms of value has become an important, very important nexus of global trade. The airport sounds very prosaic, but it's central, and you see what Qatar Airlines is doing, and also Emirates, obviously. How important to these two centers here in the Gulf is the airport, and should city planners be thinking more about the airport, prosaic as it is, as a core element of making cities vibrant, creative, international?
I mean, the essential point that cities try to do, which formerly were things like canals and all of that, is the question of centrality. Mm-hmm. And centrality, airports and centrality go together. In this particular case, in this region, your time zone, God gave you a time zone that really fits, right, where you can go everywhere in one hop. So airports are absolutely key. I mean, some people talk about things like Aerotropolis. And
maybe we'll get another runway at Heathrow. What do you think?
Well, London is struggling to keep up with
right,
these issues of connectivity. I mean, the basic point you're making, which is really about seamless connectivity, and connectivity comes in all sorts of forms.
Yeah.
And within that, from a global perspective, the airport plays a central part in that. Connectivity in the other ways that I'm hoping we're going to discuss in the next few days, you know, the digital connectivity and so on, all play a part in that. So there's the physical connectivity and the virtual connectivity, which really is the key question.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Charles. And Farah Nayeri, culture writer for the International New York Times, will now take over and chair the next session on the Digital Museum. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.